Hey, welcome to my Bulma course. Before we get started, I first want to make sure that you're familiar with Scrimba. Scrimba is this interactive platform that you're using. You can record and edit other people's screencasts and see the changes in real time. So if I have a website here, you can actually copy, edit the code, let's say, hello Bulma, save it, and then that will be reflected in the browser. So everything that I do here, you can do it as well or copy it and save it as your own. Alright, this is my Bulma course, and in it, you're going to learn how to use Bulma. Bulma is a modern CSS framework from Jeremy Thomas, who goes by Jay Githams. It's based on Flexbox, and using Bulma, we can describe our website's design using just classes. Flexbox is a newer CSS spec that makes sectioning and aligning more natural. We don't need to know Flexbox, but it is how Bulma works behind the scenes. And when I say classes, what I mean is that instead of writing our own CSS per element, we can use predefined classes. This is really what the bulk of Bulma is. And with enough classes, we can describe our website's design using just semantics. So before we deconstruct what that means, take a look at the icons that you see below. With Bulma, we can prototype columns, form elements, components, modifiers, layout elements, and elements themselves. The way that we interact with Bulma is first we use this template. This is the standard template that you would use when you start to author any Bulma website. I've added one line of code, and this is so that we can understand our website. It's just a CSS debugger. If you want to enable it, you can just uncomment this line and see that it looks a bit different. We'll use that to make sure that our website is designed perfectly. Other than that, this is where Bulma is getting linked to our website, and then these are font awesome icons. This will load it up into your website. Okay, we were talking about classes before, this area right over here. Well, Bulma is styling classes for us, and with enough classes, we can make a really robust and responsive website. This, for example, would create the website that I've been showing you so far, which already out of the box is responsive. Doesn't mean a lot so far, but it will going forward. Okay, this is a Bulma website, and it's one of the 3 websites that we're going to learn to make in these screencasts. This is what it would look like on a mobile device, and on the right, a tablet device, whereas this was the desktop. And then, we're going to learn how to make a beautiful blog. I already created a course for this, but this one will be using Bulma, and will take a fraction of the time. Instead of 40 minutes, you'll be able to do this in maybe 15 or so minutes. Then, after that, we're going to make a launch page for a product. Here, I've recreated the Tesla Roadster page. This is not the actual page, it's just my version of it. It is responsive, and that's how it would look on a mobile and a tablet device. Alright, so this is pretty exciting stuff. If you have any questions or comments or you want to reach out to me, you can click my face, reach out to me on Twitter. Otherwise, I think we're ready to get started. Alright, I'll see you in the next screencast, where we'll first build this website, and then that will slowly turn into this one. Alright, I'll see you there. Hey, welcome back. So in this screencast, we're going to turn this website into this one. This actually is a website. And then we'll use this as a base to add some complexity, make it a bit prettier, until we get all the way back up to our original slide, which again is responsive. So on a mobile device, this, and then as a tablet on the right. All right, so how do we begin? Just to start, let me point out that we have a few folders and files ready to go. I have our images that we'll use across all of our websites, and then I have some of Bulma's documentation. This is by no means all of Bulma. This is maybe 10 or 15%, if I had to guess, might be much less than that. But the point is that the way Bulma works is that we have our classes, and these classes usually follow some HTML contract. And that means that our Bulma is pretty idiomatic, and that another Bulma developer could look at our website and just by looking at these contracts, understand our website. So looking at our website, this is the first thing that we see. And in our code, we have a section. A better component that we could use instead of a section is a hero. So section is more generic, whereas hero signifies it's important and it's the first thing that we see. So now we don't have very much. Let's go ahead and look at the debugger. And we can see that the element is occupying just a portion, but by no means all of the height. So what we can do is hero has a modifier called isFullHeight. Modifiers allow us to just modify some other class. And in this case, isFullHeight is limited to hero. You can't use it everywhere. We're also going to add another modifier, has background black. Turning off our debugger. Okay, so often when you want to put something inside of a hero or a section, you put a container. You can see that the container is trying to create a space for us to put some content. Okay, and then in our container, I'm going to add an image. So we're going to add the image contract and put that right in here. You might be wondering, why do we need to specify the dimension? What can happen is that the website will resize itself because the images are loading, and images can occupy a different height when they're unloaded, as opposed to when they are loaded. And so to avoid this behavior, you can just specify what the dimensions are. So there are predefined dimensions, but you can also use an aspect ratio if you need more generalized dimensions. Now, in this case, we don't actually need this because our website is so simple. All right, and then we'll swap out image source with our actual logo. So say Bulma logo white, which was in here, right there. And then that's in our images folder. So we're almost there. We definitely need to constrain the width. So I'll just add max width and we'll say maybe 512 pixels. All right, and then last we want to center it. So here, I'm going to add a style tag. This is how we can interpolate our own CSS with Bulma's. So I'll create a center class, which is just a generic centering class. And then justify content is for the horizontal centering. So we do center as the value. And then align items is for the vertical centering. The center class will center whatever element is inside of it. So we'll go up one element and we'll put it in here. And it's centered. We'll turn off the debugger. And now we have a responsive website, albeit pretty boring. That's it for this one. In the next one, we are going to add some columns and make it a bit more like an actual website. All right, I'll see you in the next screencast. Hey, welcome back. So this is the state of our website. It's terrible. And what we can do to make it a bit better is we're going to add a section. So this is the hero at the top. It's the first thing that you see. Beneath, we have a section. And so we pretty much know how to do that. We'll add the columns class and then 3 columns. And then we'll add some text and then we're on our way. First things first, let's go to our docs and then get the section. That right here. So let's get rid of our is full height. See how that looks. And then let's make the size a bit smaller. So I'll reduce it by a factor of 2. Okay, cool, looks good. And then now we're going to add some columns. So go back to the Bulma doc, and then here's columns. Okay, so we'll just put that there. Turn on the debugger, and then let's take a look. So we have a column, a single column, occupying pretty much the full container's width. What if we had 2 columns? It's pretty smart here, and it can figure this out for us. We don't actually need to state how many columns we desire. We can pretty much just put it right in here. So we know that we're going to have 3, so I'll just add 1 more. And then we can add in some text. And then we'll turn off the debugger. It's not quite the same. So what's going on? You can see that there is an area around the text, but the text here is occupying pretty much the full column. There's no padding, there's no margin. Let's take a closer look. Right, there's no gap. So what's going on? Well, what we can do is we can add a container inside of here, but instead of container, we're going to use what's called a notification. And a notification will give it this sort of grayish style that you see here. So we're going to wrap the text in a notification class. You can see that it's got some area around it now. Yeah, all right, that looks good. All right, looks great. Now, what's so cool about Flexbox and Bulma and all this stuff is that it can do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So here's what I mean. If I resize, it's already responsive. We didn't actually need to do very much to do that. When you hear responsive design, you have to have media queries, and then you have to understand how everything connects to each other. but Bulma understands these ideas and pretty much takes out the labor for us. So that's awesome. It's optimized for tablets, desktops, and mobile devices out of the box. Now I want to point out that notification can be modified. Just like we used has background black before, you can use other modifiers. So for example, I can do is primary. And take a look how the text is white and the background is green, whereas over here the text is black and the background is gray. Alright, now the last thing is if we wanted to control the text, we can add a modifier. So we'll need to wrap this in its own paragraph. Is size. So we can do like is 3. And you can see it got really, really big. So much that it's overwhelming. I believe there's 1 through 7. And what we'll use for now is 5. So it's just a bit bigger. And that's it. In the next screencast, we're going to add those is primary and some others to make this really beautiful and then add a title for each of these columns. All right, I'll see you in the next screencast. Hey, welcome back. So this is the state of our website. Not bad, but we're going to improve it with some color. So it'll look like this by the time that we're finished, which I think looks a lot better. So how do we do that? How do we go from here to there? All right, so we know we need to remove the background, make this the color logo, because that is a different one than it is here. And then we can give the columns their own background, and then add a title, and then add a color to our notification. All right, so that is pretty straightforward. Okay, so like we mentioned, we'll get rid of the has background black. That'll default to a white, but now our logo is invisible. So we can go to our images, and then we're going to swap out the white one for this one. All right, just like that. Nice. That's a bit big, so let's change that max width. So now we don't have a partition between our hero and the section. To make that more obvious, let me point that out with the debugger. So here we can see that there's a beginning and an end to the hero and the section. To make that more obvious, we need to add a color. That's why this one looks a bit different. So we'll go to section. I'm going to add has background, and I'm going to use light for this. Nice. So now we have a problem. We can't see our column from the section. Right? We need to be able to separate these two. So what we can do is add a modifier to our notification right here. So we could do is, and then of the available ones we have, I think there's info, is link, then you have danger, warning, and primary, right? So these would all have an is before them. So let's see what they look like. Just turning off the debugger. So yeah, link gives us a nice blue. So feel free to experiment with these. I'm going to use is info, is primary, and then is warning. Now what's really cool about using these thematic modifiers is they actually modify more than just the background. Take a look at the text. The text has now altered from black to white depending on which theme we're using. So this is a really nice feature of Bulma. Bulma will inverse the text in this case to make sure that it's readable. If we force this to be a has text white, right here, it's not as readable as before. So this is one of the things that Bulma is doing for us behind the scenes that I think is really cool. Now we only need to add a title. So what we can do is we're going to add an H element. So do H1, and then we'll do, what was it? Bulma? Yeah, Bulma's the first one. And that does not look good. It looks so inferior. All right, so let's attribute this. So right now, it's not getting anything from Bulma because it doesn't have a class. So I'm going to give it a, let's say, title. Now we get something that stands out. Now it's a bit big, so I'll add a modifier to our title, and we'll do is size. We'll do, I think, 1 less. Yeah, that looks good. That was pretty quick, right? So Bulma is doing a lot of the work for us. Now we're ready to move on to adding the columns that you see beneath. All right, I'll see you in the next screencast. Hey, welcome back. So our website looks like this, which is all right. I mean, it's a bit boring. But what we can do is beautify it. So we're going to give it some icons and then another section. And then that section will have its own icons that have a color. And then the title and the paragraph will hug each other here. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to go to the Bulma documentation and we're going to grab two classes. We need the media class, which is like a Facebook post or a Twitter post. And then we need to grab the actual icon class, which is here. All right, and then we're going to put that right in here. So we have our media left, which is this area over here. And then inside of it, we need to put the icon class, which is what we did here. Okay, and then our content, well, we already have content, it's here. So we're just going to insert that right here. And that's really it. So let's go ahead and refactor this, combine our notification with the media class. So we'll do media notification, and then all we need to do is we'll make this article, and then we'll get rid of this guy. All right, so let's see how this looks. Got the wrong icon, but it's a start. The icon that we'll actually use is this one, and I didn't memorize that. That is coming from fontawesome.com, so that's where we get the codes for the Font Awesome icons. And we don't want this to have a color, so we can just get rid of that for now. Our icon is appearing as white because of isInfo, and that's pretty interesting. If I put isWarning, the icon goes black. That's a really nice feature. To make the icon bigger, we can add a modifier here. We'll say FALG for large. And you also have 2x and then 3x, and there's probably more. So we'll do 2x for now. I think that's the right size. All right, that looks really good. Now, if you wanted to have more of an area around the icon, I'll show you what I mean. See how that box is like really narrow? It doesn't have that sort of nice area around it. An easy way to fix that is we can add a modifier to the icon class of isMedium or isLarge. Let's try isLarge. Yeah, so that definitely makes a difference. And then let's turn off the debugger. So it's a bit big. Let's just make that isMedium instead. Cool. Yeah, so that's really all there is to making this a media class. I'm just going to paste in the results. The exact code that we wrote before, just copied and pasted. And yeah, the rest of it is really the same thing. So let's go ahead and just take all of this, copy and paste it again. All right, and we know that we're going to have 6 instead of 3. So we're going to repeat the columns, so instead we have 6 columns. And that does not look good. So we need to fix this. How do we fix that? So we can add a few things. For every column, we need to say it's 1/3. There's a whole bunch of modifiers that you can use. Here we're going to use is 1/3. And then this will basically force each column to occupy 1/3 of the website's width. So we just repeat that process. And then let's see how that looks. All right, that's a bit better, but it's definitely on the same line, which is not ideal. What we can do is add another modifier called isMultiline, and then this will force it to break. Nice. Now you probably know what to do here, right? What's left? We can get rid of the background for the whole section. The notification doesn't need to have a color. Now it's gray. Okay, so let's just go ahead and force that. So we say it has background white. In our paragraph, to make this hug the title, we can just give the class of subtitle. Now, finally, we're just going to make this a little smaller and then get rid of this space around the icon. We can give it a color by doing has text, let's say, warning. I'm going to go ahead and paste in the results, and then we'll load that up, and voila! It's really that cool. And it's all responsive, which is really amazing because we didn't even need to code that, right? Bulma's doing all of this for us. So Bulma's really incredible at rapidly prototyping and shipping websites quickly. And then coming up, we're going to learn how to start on the blog. I'll see you in the next screencast. Hey, welcome back. So you just finished your first Bulma website, and that's really amazing, just how much Bulma can do for you. I mean, think about it. You did responsive, beautiful website design without even touching, was it any CSS? It's like 4 or 5, it's like 5 lines of CSS. So Bulma's really a powerhouse here, and understanding and mastering Bulma can really, the thing is, even if you don't use Bulma in production, it can teach you how Jeremy or Jay Githams might solve a problem using Bulma. And I think that's pretty amazing. All right, we're going to start up our new website. This is going to be a blog. And to start, you'll note that we have this little breadcrumb at the top. So let's go ahead and paste that in. One of the components that we can use is the breadcrumb, so it's right here. Note that we're starting with the section and the container. If we're not starting with the hero, it makes sense that we would start with a section instead. All right, so we'll put that right here. And then let's take a look. And it doesn't do anything because it's empty. So let me just fill in the values. All right, so that looks really great. Now let's go ahead and open it up. And it's okay. But in our design here, the content's pretty narrow. So how do we change that? So I couldn't find a 100% idiomatic way to do this with Bulma, so instead I relied on CSS Grid. So now we're going to learn how to embed CSS Grid into Bulma. And so here's what we can do. We'll create a grid class, which requires it be display grid. And then we're going to template 3 columns because you can imagine that this website is really just 3 columns. The container is the reason that this doesn't go all the way to the edge of the web page. It's why we have a gap here. But if we just ignore that gap, we basically have a small column, a bigger column, and then another small column over here. Well, what we can do, grid template columns. And then we're going to divide our website into thirds to start. So we can do 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. FR stands for fraction unit. So now our website's being divided into thirds anywhere we put the grid class, this one. Okay, now we need to be pretty explicit here because if we just use grid as it is, the content will fall into this column. So because almost always the content falls into this column, we just need to be explicit about that. You belong to the second before the third column. I want the content to start here and then end here. So the syntax is 2/3. Okay, and then we can just put the grid here. Because our content is inside of this div, we put the grid here. And the asterisk is referring to anything inside of the grid that would include this nav. That will inherit this grid column rule. Okay, so we go ahead and load this up. Our website's divided into thirds now, with the content occupying just the center column. It's a bit too narrow, so what we can do instead is we'll give this a fixed width. All right, that's great, and let's turn on the debugger. So if we make this responsive, oh, and I forgot an F right there. Okay, all right, so looking with the debugger, see these white lines right here? Well, that's because our column is too wide. On a mobile device, it can't be 624 pixels. That might be wider than the screen. You can say this is a responsive column with a minimum and a maximum width, anywhere from 0 to 624 pixels. So now you'll note that we don't get that side effect. So that's great. All right, how do we get these bigger images? If you look on a mobile device, you'll note that they occupy the full width, whereas on a desktop device, it's just occupying most of the width. So remember, the reason we have this gap here is because of the container. Given that, let's call this column medium. And then I can update this. It's really amazing that grid is that subtle. And then now, if I wanted to refer to all 3 columns, which is pretty much what this design is, these images are spanning all 3 columns, then I'll just create another identifier, and then here I'll use XL. Okay, and then to use our new XL identifier, I need to create a class so that we can give a specific element, say, for example, nav, occupy all 3 columns and not just the center medium column. So now, if I wanted our nav to occupy all 3 columns, I can just give it the class of GridXL. Well, wait a minute, what's going on? We've got this gap right here. Well, that's actually Bulma trying to help us out. Bulma's trying to make everything pretty, but in this case, it's adding padding and we don't want it. It's interrupting the design. What we can do is we'll do is paddingless here. So this tells this section to not have its own padding. There we go, right? Now it's occupying all 3. So that's great. And let's go ahead and turn this off. And now it's just occupying the content column. It looks like we can keep the vertical padding. It's just the horizontal padding that we don't care for. So let's go ahead and make our own class because it doesn't exist in Bulma, but we'll just make it real quick. So we say is padding list horizontal? We say padding left, padding right. Okay. And then let's see what happens. Oh, I just realized we mistyped. Hang on. Oh, okay, it's better now. All right, so we created the class, and now it's occupying the full width, which is really, really what we want. We want to have 100% control of the layout in this case. Now, we're going to have a problem, which is our content doesn't hug the wall, but our image does. So how do we deal with that? Well, it's actually pretty subtle. If something has the class of grid excel, we just don't care about it. But in general, we want it to have a small gutter. So the way that we can do this is very subtle, right? We put an extra column right here and right here. Now, no matter what, there will always be a 1.5 rem, which evaluates to, I think, 24 pixels. There will always be a gutter to the left and the right of our content column. And then the 1fr is just the remainder space. So check this out. It's really amazing, right? So we load up the web page, and now we've got that gutter, so that's good. And then we go ahead and put grid excel, and then it's gone. So it's really that easy for us to define this layout using CSS Grid and still embed it into our Bulma. So we get the benefits of both CSS Grid and Bulma. Next, we're going to learn how to make this author thing at the top, and then we'll make the title, and I'll see you in the next screencast. Hey, welcome back. So now that we're code gods, we're ready to move on, and we're going to start with the title, the author at the top, and then we'll go do the title under that. So how do we do this? Well, if you recognize a pattern here, that's good. We're going to use the media class, the media component again, because it makes simple. How do we do the icon or the image at the left, and then a title, and then a paragraph to the right? So one difference though is that we're going to have this icon or the image in the center, right? You can't see it here, but if we had multiple lines, we would still want that image to be centered. So we'll learn how to do that too. And we're ready to go ahead and grab the media component. Now, one thing is that this will belong in its own section, so we'll grab that too. All right, and then one thing that we'll want to do is it's pretty much safe to assume that we can use this again, and we can use grid here again as well. If we wanted to refactor this, we could go into here and then make a rule for section to automatically get rid of the padding left and the padding right so that we didn't have to put it here every time. But for now, I'm just going to put that like this. So here we go, right? Here, we're going to put in image. So I'll grab the class for that, the component for that. I'll do this one. That right there. I'm going to change this to 64 by 64. And there isn't a class for every size. It's just that there's a few predefined classes. 64 is one of them. So there's not like a 65 by 65 and so on and so forth. All right, and then here we'll swap out the image. Do images, and we're gonna grab which one was it? Me JPEG. Okay, great. Now for the content, what we'll do is put this in a paragraph. And then, let's see, we got Zadig. Okay, so let's put that in real quick. All right, so we have a strong tag to make it bold. We have a link that goes nowhere right now. And then I'm going to force this text to be gray. So to do that, I've got it wrapped inside of a span, and then I've given it the class hasTextGray to just force it to be a bit lighter. Then I'm just using a break to the next line, because it belongs to the same paragraph. And then here, this is definitely recommended. We're using the time element so that search engines can basically document when the intended publication date was. So for this, I've just put the same date as I have that I published this article. So that was April 20th. All right, and the rest is pretty simple. By the way, this is not the bullet character. It's actually, I think I'm saying it right, interpunct, right? And this is an octothorpe. So, all right. Okay, so let's see how this looks. Nice. Now you'll note, if you are OCD like me, that the image is not in the center, right? We've got that little gap beneath but not above. So how do we deal with that? It took me a little while to figure this out, but it's pretty simple. We're going to make a general use class that we can use, and I'm going to call it center, which this will use flexbox. So we just got flex here, and then I'm going to center horizontally and vertically. If you were asleep earlier, we did this like a few screencasts ago, so this really isn't anything new. So where do we put that? So where we can actually put it is right here. The reason is because we're going to center not just the figure, but the text too. Because the text is taller than the figure, the text will not actually have a gap above or beneath it, but because the figure is shorter than the figure will have a gap above and beneath it now. All right, we'll turn off the debugger, and that's one problem solved, but we have one more. Got this huge gap up here, and you might like that. I don't. So the way that we deal with that, again, is the padding. Here, because we've started a new section, Bulma basically said, hey, I think I want you to have some padding too. We're just going to be, just going to be a little dirty here and just inline that out. All right, so now we've got that nice even gap above and below the nav, and then the author part really looks ideal. Now on for the title. I don't know that this is the most idiomatic way to do this. It's just sort of what I worked out. Go ahead and put something inside of a div. Inside of it, we'll do an H1 and an H2. You remember, if you want to give this a style, you can give them a class of title and subtitle. Remember, there's modifiers to change the size. So I'll have this cascade. I'll do is 2 and then is 3. And then here, we'll do how to build. Yeah, that's great. Let's take a look. Ooh. So what I came up with was this. Well, we know that sections will go ahead and give us some padding. Why don't we just use the section class here? We don't need to use the section element because that's not semantically correct. This isn't really a new section. But we can borrow the properties from section to style this very consistently. So I just grab this. And voila. All right, let's see how it looks on a mobile device. Not bad. We'll do some things later to make the text appear a little bit smaller so that it fits better. But other than that, it looks great. Right, in the next screencast, we're going to figure out how to do our images, which are gorgeous, and then we're going to go and do the content in the screencast after. All right, I will see you very, very soon. Hey, welcome back. We've got this beautiful blog design, and now we're ready for these really nice images. So what's that about? Well, what we can do is we'll go to the docs and we're going to grab the columns like we used before. Yeah. And then looking here, I've got 3, so we'll do 3 columns. We're going to do 3 columns, so we do. Okay, we have our 3 columns. And inside of each column, there's going to be an image, which could be a link. It could be just an image. That's fine. And then we'll have a caption at the bottom. All right, so we'll grab the image class, and then that goes inside of each of these. All right, we'll remove this guy for now, and then we'll do up 3 images right here. It's going to be blog 1 through 3. Okay, let's see what happens. Hey, hang on. Forgot images. Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. It's okay. So we forgot to make this a grid Excel. Right? How's that look? Hey. Looks okay. So one thing that we can do in Bulma is remember how we used notification before to give sort of a background? Well, there's a few more that we can use. There's box and card. I really like card, so we'll use it here. And that'll give us that little nice line and a very, very subtle shadow beneath it. So that's the effect that we have here. All right, and then I'll just add a card to each of these. Yeah. So we've got this gap, which is a bit weird. And then, we had this other problem where on a mobile device, we probably would like this in general, but for images, we just want it to be wide the whole time. Okay, let's go and get rid of the gap first. So there's a feature called isVariable, which has its own modifier. I think it's like 1 through a few, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. And if we do 0, that will turn off the gap. Now, if I want to increase that just a little bit, 1 or 2 or 3, let's do 2. Yeah, so this is a really nice feature. If you don't want to completely remove it, just partly remove it. All right, so we're going to make this 0. And yeah, that looks really cool. How do we deal with this? There's another modifier that we can use for columns because columns are such an essential component called isMobile. I want you to keep your aesthetic whether you're on a mobile or a desktop device. Really quite simple. And again, the reason that this isn't going full width here is because of the container. If we really didn't like that, it wouldn't be hard for us to just remove it. All right, and let's go ahead and add a figure caption below. So do fig caption. You know what? I'm going to make this a figure so that it's easier. And then we can just make these divs for now instead. Now, I want this to be small, and Bulma recognizes that, so no problem. And then, what was the text? It was like that, and you don't need to click because you're already here. Good stewards of the internet. I'm just going to make these links that go nowhere. Okay, and then over here, let's see what happens. So, okay, I think we know what we can do, right? We could put the class center here. All of our problems go away. Yeah, that's not bad. And then let's just see how this would look with some content beneath it. So we'll just do like, right? We need some space there. So what we can do is, because this doesn't belong to Bulma, Bulma isn't giving us any special treatment. Instead, the Bulma way to do this might be to use level. It allows you to align content along a level. This is just indicating that anything in it needs to belong anywhere on the left, the center, or the right. And then here, I can make this a level item. Now, basically saying I want this thing to be a level, and then we have one item, so this should be centered. And because this belongs to Bulma, it knows how to give us that breathing room that we so desire. Right before the content was hugging it, and that wasn't ideal. Yeah, so we had that little space right there. And then let's make the text a little bit lighter. We'll do has text gray. And then the last thing is for me, I'm really picky, so I don't want this gap right here. Well, if we inspect it, eventually we'll find that that is a margin being applied. So it's a margin being applied to the columns. What we can do is just say, remember we used is paddingless before? Well, here I'll use is marginless. Oh yeah, that looks so cool. And of course, it's all responsive. Yeah. All right, I'll see you in the next screencast where we add this content and then we'll add a rule to make this a little bit smaller on a mobile device so that the content fits a bit better. All right, see you soon. Welcome back, Internet. Now we're ready to add the content of our blog. It'd be a pretty terrible blog if we just kept it as is. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's kind of useless. So what we can do is, in the documentation, there is a class that we can use called content. And you, my friend, have seen this before. Voila, right? We've seen this. Now, content didn't do anything for us at the time because we just had a boring old paragraph. But now we're going to start to understand really how powerful content is. And content becomes especially relevant if you want to use Markdown in your websites, because doing all these attributes all the time can be a bit annoying. Sometimes you just want the element to describe the content and for that to be enough. And so content is a great example of this. So let's just do an H1, do an H2. Right, so note these don't have the title or the subtitle that we've used before, which was necessary when we wanted to give this a style. Here, these are just naked HTML elements. When we load them up, note that they do have a style, and that's because content is helping us out here. Content is really magical because we basically don't have to worry about any of the trivial elements that we might want to use. It's good for paragraphs, for lists, whether they're ordered or unordered. You've got your H's that I've showed you before. We've got block quotes and even tables. It's pretty awesome. I'm going to grab a really complete example from the website, super complete, and I'll show you what I mean. Right? There are no funny classes, right? And we even have stuff like this, where it's super, right? And then here we've got sub for, I don't know what it stands for, sub. Maybe submarine? I don't know what that stands for. Okay, well, let's take a look. Whoa, what? So look at that, right? Our blog is really gorgeous, and we had to do so little work to get there. Now this, let me just point that out. That is my tabs screwing with the source code. So here, this is wrapped in a pre, which means basically pre-process, don't process this text. You want to have that hug the left wall where there's no space to the left. And then that extra space, we can fix that like that. At least that's one way to fix it. I'm sure there are others. Anyway, this is really powerful, right? Bulma has done so much heavy lifting for us, and all we had to use is HTML. I think Tim Berners-Lee would be like extremely proud right now. So anyway, for our website, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of this. And instead, I'll put the content. Yeah. Now check this out. This is also why content is so powerful. Content can scale. So we can have medium content. We can have large content. Content's pretty miraculous. I mean, you can have different paragraphs in your website have different sizes. And that's not just true for text. It's true for all those elements that I showed you just a moment ago. So Bulma is really freaking magical. Let's say you wanted to do like is large notification. That's a really simple example of how we combine different Bulma classes to make like an advertisement or like a banner. And then let's say we want to like style it. Right? It's really crazy how powerful Bulma is. Anyway, let's go ahead and just leave that to, I think its medium was good. And that's it. This is how you make a beautiful blog. In a responsive sense, it's not optimized. I mean, it is mobile, but the text is a bit big. So I'll show you a fascinatingly simple way that we can fix that. Make a media query, which means I want you to override some code in this circumstance. And the circumstance, if we're rendering our website at some max width, then consider the following rules. So I'll say I want my root element to update its font size from the default of 16 pixels to, let's say, like 14. Let's just do a percent. Do like 90%. 100% would be 16 pixels here. 90% would be not 14, but definitely easier on the eyes. And then the circumstance is when I get to right here. So we know that this is 624. And I need some way to say 624 plus these guys. So I can say plus 1.5 REM. So remember, 1 REM is 16 pixels. So 1.5 REM is 24 pixels. And then we do times 2, 48. And then we do 624 plus 48. And then we can say 672 pixels. All right, now when we get to that, when we cross over from a desktop or a tablet device to what we're calling a mobile device, we get a slight update. And everything that is defined with an EM or an REM as its unit will also proportionally change too. It's really powerful. If we wanted to go even further, totally possible too. That's it. You've made a beautiful blog in like record time, and it's responsive. And we have like, what, 15 lines of code? It's crazy. Yeah, so that's amazing. Now we're going to go all the way up to a launch page. I have stolen the Tesla Roadster page and then made it our own using Bulma. Believe it or not, this will also be responsive, and we're going to do it with, again, very little code. All right, enough talk. Let's get into it. I'll see you in the next screencast. Hey, welcome back. I'm pretty excited. I'm not going to say much about this. We're just going to get started. All right, so we're going to use a hero. I'm going to drop hero body. I'm just going to start with that. All right, let's take a look with the debugger turned on. And, it's not occupying any height. So for that, we can do is full height. Remember, we did that pretty recently when we were designing this web page. Here we have is full height, and then here we just removed it. So for this website, you can imagine that we just have a hero and it has a modifier of is full height. Okay, let's take a look. Now it's a darker color, right? If I remove that, it gets a little lighter. And that's because it's a darker color on top of our whole website, that being the hero. Okay, so we can start to fill in the background. So in our images, we've got 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to use multiple images because we want our website to look different on a mobile or a tablet device. So this is actually a different image than this one. I mean, it's the same picture, but the Tesla team has edited it so that it's optimized for a mobile or a tablet device. And we're going to do the same here. So all we need to do is target the hero. We're going to say you have a background, and a background of images, and then hero 1. All right, let's see what happens. Oh, hang on. The debugger is overriding the background. Yeah, the first time this happened, I thought my screen was dirty. It's the picture's huge, right? So we need to, let's center it. All right, so we need to go a bit further. We're going to use something called cover, which means I want this image to, basically want the image to fit inside of our website's browser. Yeah, that looks really good. And it is responsive in a sense. But the problem is that on mobile devices, it's just too narrow. We can't see the car, it just doesn't look ideal. So to fix that, what we can do is use a media query. Actually, we're going to use 2. That our max width is 1024 pixels, or 768 pixels. Then we're going to display a different background. Then we just update that, and let's take a look. Hey, wait. Hang on, I'm missing the hero. Okay. Yeah. So that actually does look better, right? All right, so there is the desktop, right? And we get to a tablet, changes a little bit, and then on a mobile device, it changes even more. So the point is that these images are optimized for different devices. And that's great. We'll get a better experience as a result. Now, you might have noticed when I was changing the widths, you might have seen like a flash of white. Well, that's because the background behind the image, well, defaults to white if we're not explicit. If we want that to be black, which I think is a bit more in brand, we can just do this. Now, while we're waiting for an image to load, as we're changing the width, we'll get a stroke of black. Yeah, so now we get like a stroke of black if our image is still loading, which I think is just a little bit better than white. So that's it for this screencast. In the next one, we'll focus on the navigation bar at the top, which of course will be mobile, but in a different sense. We're going to hide some content in the event that we're on a mobile device. All right, I'll see you very soon. Hey, welcome back. So now we're going to add that nav bar at the top, and it's going to require some extra CSS. So I have these helpers here, and we're going to link to them like this. So it's not that different than the way that we link our debugger. It's actually the same. So looking at our helpers, we have a few things that we need to add in order to make this work. You're familiar with center, that's nothing new. But now, instead of just centering an element inside of another one, We can put it at the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. So that's nice. And we have this special case where by default, flex direction sets to row. And in the event that we want it to set to column, then we can just use center column instead. You might be wondering what the heck does that mean? Well, looking at this, the elements are following each other across a row, whereas here, they're following each other across a column. So this is an example where if we want the elements to fall vertically, we can say center column, and that will still center the element inside of a column. All right, these just make this stuff work, and then down here, this is how we can have single space text, and here, this is if we want to hide something if we're on a mobile device. So at 1024 pixels, anything that has a class of desktop, I want it to just disappear. All right, so now we can add that nav bar, and to do that, we're going to go into our docs, and we're going to grab this guy. Instead of body, we're going to use head here. Okay, now the way that I thought of this design is to have this split into 3 columns. So I have the left, the center, and then the right column over here. We know how to do that. Just go to grab the columns, and then we put that there. And we know we'll have 3, so I'll just put this like this. Now remember, when we're on a mobile device, it's going to stack the columns. So to fix that, we can just put is mobile. And I found that if we put is marginless, it'll look a lot prettier, right? It's just very simple now. So now I'm going to fill in the values with some text for now. This. Okay, cool. So our elements are falling vertically, and we don't want that. We effectively want them to fall horizontally. If you remember a moment ago, one of our helpers, well, these helpers do that because flex direction is set to row by default. That's exactly what we want. In fact, we can just leave that there, and it won't do anything at all. I'll just put center here. And that actually centers the elements inside of their parent. Easy enough, we can just make that left and right. Cool, it's looking better. Now, to deal with the fact that the text is just too close, I found that there is a class just for this purpose. So we can use navbar. I found that there's a class to deal with this. So we can do navbar item. That will space it out real nicely. So we'll just put that everywhere. Okay, great. This is looking phenomenal. Now, on a mobile device, we still have the trouble of having all this data. So the way that we can deal with it is we'll just put desktop here. Remember that's this one here. We're saying at 1024 pixels or less, hide the content. Instead of putting it here for shop and sign in, we want to keep this button here. So instead, we can put desktop there. And that was really easy. Okay, now really all that's left is just style. So all that's really left is basically the icon and then the style. So the style is actually pretty easy. Everything is a heading and it has a text weight of bold. We also want the text to be black. And I found I can't just put has text black here. It doesn't work. So instead, we're going to be a bit lazy and just put it right here. So again, if we wanted to, we could just refactor this in the style or even go all the way to Bulma and customize it for our needs. But for now, just do it this way. All right, that's looking really good. Let's swap out the text here and the text here with the right image and icon. So we know, we're familiar enough with how to do that. So we know how to do that. We just grab the guy and we go to here. And I want to keep navbar item. And I don't need. We'll link our logo, which is right here. And you'll note that it's going to be like crazy. It's because it's rendering the SVG's height and width and not the desired height and width. I'm just going to inline this for now. And we can say height 1 rem. which kind of works, but the width is still way too big. You can see that here. But to fix that, I worked out that the width to the height was 6.25. That's great. And now we just need to deal with the hamburger. So we just copy that, put it here, and then there is a Font Awesome icon for this. Now you'll note that the text is grayish, so we say has text black. And let's just make sure it's all good. You might be wondering, why is the height changing? So again, what we'll do is we can give it a fixed width and height. Make it 1 to 1, and let's take a look. So we got the boundaries right, but here it's just doing something funny. Found that if we put center here, all of our problems go away. Yeah, let's take a look. All right, now to emulate that this is active, go to Roadster and make that white. I believe that there's an isActive class that you can use, or you can make your own style, or you can do this your own way. I just want to show you the fastest way that you could. I just want to show you the fastest way that you could emulate that design. Now, unfortunately, I don't have enough time to make this interactive, but we will finish this responsive and all. All right, I'll see you in the next screencast. Hey, welcome back. So our site's awesome, and now we're going to add in the Tesla and Roadster text that you see at the top. To do that, I'm going to add a hero body. And then we're going to have an H1 and an H2. Whoops. And you can probably work out how we style this, right? We just do, and actually let's do subtitle here because the text is smaller, not bigger. And then we'll put title here. Yeah. So just put this in a div for now. If you don't know what you're doing, just put it in a div. Okay, so this works all the same. All right, so the point is we want to have this up at the top and we want it to be centered. So what we need to do is basically override where it falls on the page. And there's a general class that we can use to deal with this. So we can do isOverlay, which means its position is independent from the content on the page. So even though I've got content here, the fact that it's overlaid on top just ignores that. So it's a good start. And there is a modifier, has text centered, to center the text. And then you can kind of work out that we just need to just shift it down a bit. So we can do style, top, and 82 was right. Now note, I'm not using EM or RAM here because I want the height to always be the same, whether we're on a mobile device or not. Let's take a look. So yeah, that looks great. So we turn off the debugger, and I guess all that's left is this gap in between and the text color itself. I think you know how to do this, right? We can just say, hey, wait a minute, I know how to do that. Just do has text black. There. Yeah, that worked. And we'll do single spaced here. Single spaced. We'll do single spaced here. Remember our helper, we had single space defined. And because I have this other version of it, it doesn't matter where we define it. We can put it here or we can put it up here. So the asterisk is really vital here. Okay, so now that content pretty much hugs each other, which is what we want. And then finally, I want this to be a little bit lighter. So instead of changing the color, let's change the text weight. We do has text weight light. And then yeah, that gives us sort of a nice aesthetic. All right, that one was easy. Now last, we're gonna do this like complicated thing at the bottom. And I was like super intimidated when I went to Tesla and was like, how do I do that? Turns out that this is actually pretty intuitive if we use grid. I'm sure there's a way that you could use Flexbox, but I found that grid was basically the most expressive way to solve this problem. That's it for this screencast. I'll see you in the final screencast. Hey, welcome back. So our site's freaking awesome, but it's missing the specs at the bottom. They're kind of intricate. Their responsive design is not like anything we've seen so far. So you might be feeling a bit intimidated now. How do you possibly do this and do that in like 10 minutes or less? And the thing is, if you have the right tool, it can be a lot easier than you imagine. So what we're going to do is use CSS Grid here. So I have a link to a file called Grid, and over here I have it defined. It's just empty. We're going to use Grid to create this design, and it's going to be a lot easier than I think you might imagine. Let's go ahead and create our hero's foot. Do like this. I like a main instead. Could be footer, but it's up to you. And we're going to follow the format that we did before, so we have everything inside of a div just inside of the parent. So here is where we can define our grid. And I'm going to use an ID for this. It could be a class, but it doesn't really matter, at least not right now. Now looking at this design, I want you to imagine that this is 4 columns and 2 rows. I want you to imagine that this is 4 columns and 2 rows. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 for the columns, and then here you have 2 rows, right? So you have 1 and 2. And beyond that, you have 5 elements. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, so we'll create 5 divs. I love div. So A, B, C, D, E. So if we go to our grid, okay, so now let's turn on the debugger. Okay, so you can see the foot is trying to exist here, but there's just nothing to show. All right, so we'll put some content. Yeah, all right, so let's constrain the grid to, let's say, width 768, like that. And then let's center here, because that will center its child, which is the grid. Cool. And let's just add a padding around here. Okay, cool. So now it's got like this little gap beneath it, which is like we have here. Do a grid like this, and then split. Grid. Instead of grid template columns, we're going to do areas. So areas are pretty amazing. Now, if you remember, we have 4 columns and 2 rows. So in terms of IDs, this is A, B, C, D, and E. And so what we want is to say that A occupies all 4 columns in the first row, and then B, C, D, E each occupy 1 column, but span the entire row. I think I said that right. All right, so here's how we can do that. We can say A, A. So this is 1 row and then 4 columns. And here we can say B, C, D, E. All right, let's see what happens. We've got the text at the top, and then these would each be the specs. Now, on a mobile device, this won't do anything fancy, but I bet you have an idea of how we can do that. So we can say at media max width 512 pixels. We can say grid. We're going to override grid template areas. It's astonishing how simple this is. All we need to do is remove a column and add a row. That's it. I know. It's crazy. Let's see what happens. So on a mobile device, you can see how the reserve now is at the bottom and the specs are in the center, and then the text is at the top. And then that changes depending on what we're looking at. The rest of this is really just aesthetics. So what we can do is we can say, hey, I want the rows to have a gap. You can say grid row gap 1 rem. That gives us a nice break in between. And I think you know what to do now. The rest is really just titles, subtitles, and an icon. So I'm going to go ahead and paste them in because it is pretty cumbersome, but I bet you'll understand all of it once I put it here. So there it is. And let's just talk about it real quick. So one of the things that you'll note is that we're using content column because I want the text here to be on top of each other. If we used center, which is flex direction row, it flows left to right. And so to fix that, we just say center column. Take a look. You'll recognize all of this code now. We have a paragraph, has text centered, has text white. Here we have a paragraph with an icon inside of it. Here I've got this speed icon, has text gray light. We set a fixed width and a fixed height, which is just a little bit smaller than the text. And we can use modifiers. So we have varying size text, right? We have 1.9 as big, and then small, we have S. And that's because we're changing the size with the modifier is size 5. For the Reserve Now button, that's really just a link. It has some modifiers, and I set the width to 100 so that it always occupies the available width. And really that's all there is to it. The thing is, with Bulma, you can really rapidly prototype, and the code is fairly idiomatic. So I really hope you enjoyed this course. Please share this if you think it was valuable. And if you want to reach out to me, hit me up on Twitter right here. You can click my face. Otherwise, yeah, congratulations. You are now a Bulma Ninja. Happy coding. See ya.